he paused American military assistance and intelligence sharing with Ukraine, which was a very severe step, whereas he's done very little to punish Putin for clear obstructionism. But I think Trump is getting, you might say, increasingly more embarrassed. The New York Post, a conservative paper that has substantially supported Trump, called him out on this yesterday with a very tough editorial.
Trump said he was pissed off with Vladimir Putin and threatened to impose further sanctions unless Putin started to play ball on a ceasefire with Ukraine. Let's speak to John Herbst, former US ambassador to Ukraine. John, good evening to you. Thank you so much for being with us. Look, the Kremlin today has done their best to play down Donald Trump's changing view on Vladimir Putin. They've offered a pretty muted response, really. Donald Trump, we know, is very angry, pissed off was the word, were the words he used. And apparently Russia says the work is ongoing with the United States. This is no big deal. What do you think?
Well, I think that Putin has been not been responsive to Trump's concerns. Trump said last week twice that he thought maybe Russia may be stalling. And then Putin unleashed his latest salvo when he said, Zelensky is not a legitimate leader, so we need to have some changes in Ukraine before we can have a negotiation. That's what prompted Trump's latest statement. But, even before Putin began to make nice with Trump, Trump was backpedaling. He said last night on Air Force One, before Putin's statement that you just cited, well, he doesn't really think Putin is trying to string him along. And then to demonstrate his double standard vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia, he then slammed Zelensky for not agreeing to the latest proposal that the United States offered on a mineral deal, which reinserted conditions which the United States has taken out in early negotiations at Ukraine's insistence.
OK, all right. Look, I suppose the question is Donald Trump finally realising, if this is a game that's being played, and inevitably, the UK has been very involved with trying to help President Zelensky through these negotiations, and the playbook would go like this, that Putin, yes, I'm ready to come to the table. He would be on the precipice of signing a ceasefire agreement, but ultimately not do it, which is angering Donald Trump, has angered Donald Trump. So far, so good in terms of that playbook, to the point where Donald Trump becomes so bitter about Vladimir Putin, who has no intention of signing a deal anyway, that he finally comes round to see Zelensky's viewpoint. Is that too much of a happy ending?
I don't rule that out. But while Trump at times has expressed frustration with Putin, he always backs away from the precipice. And when you consider, for example, what happened with Zelensky, that Trump didn't like the way Zelensky spoke in the Oval Office, and then 2 days later he paused American military assistance and intelligence sharing with Ukraine, which was a very severe step, whereas he's done very little to punish Putin for clear obstructionism. But I think Trump is getting, you might say, increasingly more embarrassed. The New York Post, a conservative paper that has substantially supported Trump, called him out on this yesterday with a very tough editorial. So Trump's beginning to see that he's not looking very strong, even amongst his own supporters. That may eventually force him to punish Putin for clearly obstructing a peace deal. The Moscow Times last week, citing senior Russian officials on background, said, of course, Putin's stalling. He wants to continue the fighting on land. And that's exactly what he's doing.
Well, look, Donald Trump has threatened to place tariffs of up to 50% on countries that import Russian oil if a ceasefire deal is scuppered by Moscow. John Herbst, good to speak to you again. Thank you, former US ambassador to Ukraine.
Shall we talk a bit about Ukraine? Donald Trump was at it again on Air Force One, his presidential plane. He came back to the back of the plane, spoke to the journalists in the cheap seats, and told them all that he was very angry with Putin, said he was pissed off, forgive his language, if it turned out that Vladimir Putin was delaying a ceasefire. Now, most people you talk to will probably think, of course he's delaying a ceasefire, but this is what the president had to say.
Some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that.
Not happy with Putin. But then came this. He didn't seem that happy with President Zelensky of Ukraine either. Accused him of trying to back out these were Donald Trump's words, back out of a deal on Ukraine's minerals. It's been rewritten, this deal. Now, it's not just about mineral deposits, it's about infrastructure, it's about ports, it's about energy, and it's on terms which, well, are extraordinarily one-sided. Many people suggest rather larcenous. And he said that that Ukraine would have big problems if they didn't agree to this kind of deal. Molly Ball, when you heard the president there saying that he was very angry with Putin and floating the possibility of sanctions for those who used Russian oil if Putin didn't fall into line, what did you make of it?
Well, it says to me that he is realizing that the Russians so far are not cooperating with his peace plan. You know, there have been these talks, there have been these attempts to show progress. Ukraine has made some substantial concessions, and while there was an announcement of a sort of limited type of ceasefire, it quickly became apparent that that was conditional on matters that Russia had not yet agreed to or put in place. And so we see that the Russians are dragging their feet, and that appears to have gotten through to President Trump. And he says he plans to talk to Putin again this week, and that he plans to push him, that he hopes that they, you know, because of this good relationship that he believes he has with Putin, he believes that once they talk, they'll be able to resolve things. But you know, he's expressing some frustration that I think is genuine, because what we've seen is that so far the Russians really have not moved in his direction.
Yeah, well, it's certainly true they haven't moved on the Russian side, but you give the president credit for meaning it when he says he's ready to get tough with Vladimir Putin, because that's been at odds with everything we've seen so far.
Well, I give him credit for being sincere and expressing frustration. I think that you're right. The proof is in the pudding in terms of, is he going to push Putin, and is he going to actually get something from Putin? Because so far he hasn't. So far, whatever discussions he's been having with Putin have not achieved a result. So if he is genuinely angry, and I think he is, or he wouldn't be saying so, is that going to lead him to actually push Putin in a way that has an impact? I mean, I think that's the real question.
Adam.
Molly, isn't the real conclusion that Trump and his associates who've been working on this are incompetent, and that he overpromised in the first place, and that these negotiations are going nowhere because, from the point of view of the two belligerents, unreasonable and unrealistic demands are being made?
That is certainly one possibility. Look, I think the president came in with some very lofty promises. He sold this as something that would be so easy if he could just be the one in the executive chair. He made it sound like, you know, it was sort of low-hanging fruit and he'd wrap it up in a day. That has clearly not been the case. And, you know, the vaunted Donald Trump deal-making skills, I think it is fair to question them and say, you know, when he promised that he would be able to do this spectacular deal so quickly, where's the proof of that? Where are we seeing it? Because so far we haven't seen it.
Anna.
I think the word quickly there is the paramount one here, because he's expressing frustration, but not really with Vladimir Putin, with the fact that he wants it done. He wants to forget about this. He wants to move on to what he sees as more important priorities. And I think the concern here is that because Donald Trump sees this ultimately as a negotiation that really will be done between the United States and Russia, the two big players in it, that you end up, while he may be in public expressing frustrations and making threats to Russia, he will end up to just leaning on Ukraine to accept a bad deal just to wrap it all up.
And to get the minerals.
And that mineral deal, Molly, well, if the original draft was tough, the next one is absolutely extraordinary.
Yes, I mean, I'm not an expert on that aspect of it, but this is certainly what the Ukrainians have feared all along, is that they are sort of collateral damage here, and that Trump really just wants to make a deal with Putin, and whatever he has to sacrifice from the Ukrainians, he's not particularly concerned with that. So I think, you know, we'll find out when he has that next conversation. We'll find out when we see whether there's, you know, next terms that are proposed, whether there's any progress here. But certainly it has not been as quick and easy as he would like, and he's frustrated with that.
And now we've got the Kremlin, haven't we? A leading figure in the Kremlin who's part of the Russian negotiating team for a ceasefire, who's telling us that Russia is talking to America about mineral deals where Russian territory is concerned. Now, that is not encouraging for Ukraine. It suggests that, well, it supports the impression that Donald Trump is not interested in the security guarantee. He thinks a handshake with Putin on the business of it all.
I mean, it's not Russian territory, is it? It's territory which the Russians
Ukraine.
are occupying in Ukraine.
I think I've also
But I think
suggested
separately they
Russia
are
as
also
well.
within Russia itself. And I think Donald Trump has hinted at that as well, that he wants that.
Which suggests that we're talking about, shaking hands on economic collaboration developed at a rate that Europe just are not interested in following. Whole thing can be done as business, and the familiar image is of bosses carving up territory. You have this, we'll have that, and let the little people look after themselves.
And what remains of Ukraine paying protection money to the Americans in the form of minerals.
Okay, well, we're going to follow that story very closely in coming days because it needs a good deal of following. Molly Ball at the Wall Street Journal. As always, Molly, really grateful to you for joining us on the show this evening. Thank you.